Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We've got an awesome tasting for you tonight. I know a few people are still trickling in. This is an earlier tasting for us than normal, but we wanted to accommodate our special guests. And actually, we have 3 special guests tonight, not just 2. But I'll get to that in just a moment. But they're joining us predominantly from an hour or 2 east of us. So we didn't want to make this one too late. But I know there's some of you on the west coast of Canada. And actually, one of our hosts tonight, our guest host, is actually on the west coast tonight as well, too, by chance. So we appreciate you all logging in. I'm not going to go through them as we do at the start of most of our tastings. As many of you know, we have a number of tastings coming up over the next week or so. But I'll put that in the chat there if you want to take a look at it. There's still some spots left for next week's tasting. And I've put a photo up of our Loch Lomond Glen Scotia tasting because I truly believe it has an awesome range that you don't want to miss. And I think the photo we had up to advertise that one probably was not doing it justice. So we've replaced it. The lineup, if you didn't catch it in the group chat, is now in the main chat. We're going to start with small batch bourbon, single barrel rye, sour mash, the American whiskey, and then we're going to go on to the toasted barrel finished sour mash, the 10-year bourbon, and the 20-year bourbon for the lineup tonight. I also want to give a shout out to our friends at Authentic Wine and Spirits, who, as always, are great partners and supporters of these events and help make them happen. In particular, James Bourne, who's on vacation and unable to join us tonight, but who is a great guy. And I'm really excited because the sour mash is my favorite bourbon, and we've got 2 versions of it tonight, which is really exciting. I guess probably you're not here to hear me speak, so I'd like to introduce our guests tonight. We have Andrea Wilson, who's the Master of Maturation and also the Chief Operating Officer for Michter's, which is really cool. We have Raven Fuller, who until recently was the Western North American brand ambassador for Michter's. She's taking on a new role, handing it off to Karina, it's Karina Mayer, sorry, fine print on the screen, who is the new Western North American brand ambassador. So we have 3 ladies from Michter's tonight, which is really awesome. And one of them is joining us from her car currently because she's still on the road in Western North America, spreading the gospel about Michter's, and didn't want to miss it, even though she had a meeting. So Raven, nice to see you tonight.
Thank you so much. It's great to see all of you. Thank you for spending your evening with us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, and thanks for making the extra effort to do this from a parked and or moving vehicle. Raven may pop in or out depending on her connection. She's in parts of rural Oregon right now. But Andrea Wilson is going to get us rolling here. Tell us a little bit about Michter's, what makes them unique, and then maybe get us started off with the tasting. Andrea, thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here tonight. I enjoy the opportunity to be able to still continue to do these Zoom tastings. I know the world has gone back to everything that we know and love, but it's still a nice opportunity to get together in sort of the comfortable surroundings wherever you are and just be able to taste some good whiskey. So very pleased to be able to spend it with you all. I have been to Calgary. I've been to Kensington wine market. I love it. And I'm very appreciative of the support that we have from everyone in that market and surrounding markets. So a little bit about who I am. So I am the Master of Maturation here for Michter's. I look after all of the aging side of the business. I share time with our Master Distiller, Dan McKee, who's not able to join us tonight. We sometimes have to divide our responsibilities. So he's not able to be here. So you get me tonight, but I think it's an important aspect. So many times you hear from master distillers and it's always about the distilling side. I'm very grateful to Michter's for recognizing that, the making of whiskey is a long sequence with many variables and decisions, and details matter. So, one of the beauties of Kentucky Bourbon and Rye is not everybody's doing it the same way, and each company has unique philosophies and unique characters and history and heritage. And I think that's the beauty of what we do. Now, the history of Michter's. So we started in 1753 in Schaefferstown, Pennsylvania. We were started there by a gentleman, John Schenck, and then John Schenck later sold to Abraham Baumberger. Schenck's and Baumberger's are part of our legacy series of Michter's. So we try to honor the heritage by creating those two products. We actually just released them the month of July. So they should be making their way to Canada if they haven't already. And then later, we closed during that fateful time in the United States when Prohibition happened, and we reopened in 1934. And then we were acquired by an individual, Lou Foreman, and Lou Foreman actually renamed the brand after his two boys, Michael and Peter, and it was the merger of their two names that made the name Michter's. So it's kind of an enchanting story that way, and endearing. And then sadly, in 1989, the distillery closed, and that was the end of Michter's. We are a privately held company today. We are family owned. We have no external investors. And the family that acquired the abandoned trademark did so in the 90s. It's a family of three brothers, John, Nino, and Joe is the youngest. Joe started in the whiskey business, actually closing out some Michter's miniatures as a summer job. And he became very fascinated with the brand. Its history, it's very old, very interesting brand. And so he started socializing the idea of potentially acquiring the abandoned trademark. He was being mentored by a gentleman, Dick Newman. Dick Newman was from Kentucky. He knew a thing or two about whiskey because he ultimately ran, at that time, Austin Nichols Wild Turkey. And he also ran Old Taylor and Old Crow for National Distilling Company. So he said to Joe, when you think about whiskey, you really, and if you're really considering acquiring this trademark, you should really surround yourself by people who really understand the whiskey business. And it's more than just people who understand distilling or maturing. It's also all the people who are extremely important to the compliance and the financial side of the business, because we're a highly regulated industry. So they decide to acquire the abandoned trademark for $245 in a trademark application. That's how they came to own the Michter's trademark. Now, they didn't get any assets, no barrels, no distillery, nothing. Just great, you own the trademark name now. The first strategic decision they made was to relocate the brand to Kentucky. So everything that has been done since the 90s with the ownership of the Malioco family has been done here in Kentucky. Now, before I continue with the story, I think we should get going on some whiskey tasting. So we'll start with the Michter's bourbon. So the bourbon is 45.7% ABV. It's meant to be a really nice sipping bourbon, just something with a good nose, good texture, good, sort of dynamic across your palate, but just trying to create something that makes you have a good sipping experience. So I like to always encourage people to drink a little water before you get started tasting. Don't taste with a dry palate, certainly. I'm assuming you are all whiskey professionals and know these little tidbits, but I always just try to make sure I start out with a moist palate.
I couldn't agree more on that point. And I know my colleague Kurt, who's joining me tonight on this as well, we typically have, this maybe is going a bit too far, a beer and a water going at the same time, because we just like that they complement each other quite well. Obviously, the water is a little bit better for cleansing your palate and whatnot, but yeah, you're going from 0 to 40+% alcohol can be rough for most people.
That's
saying it's
that's
a
an
little
interesting idea. I think I'm gonna try the beer thing. I haven't done that before. I usually have water, so
Well, it's the beer for me is refreshing. It gives me that
Yeah.
little, it's like having bread
can
and a
see
wine
that.
tasting. It helps to kind of, for me, it helps cleanse the palate, maybe not flavor wise, but taste buds wise. But yeah. Always love the standard Michter's bourbon. And I don't know why, but to me, the bourbons in the Michter's family have always had a bit of a style that's a little different from a lot of the classic bourbons that are out there. That they have a bit more depth and complexity to me, and I think that's why I've been drawn to them. I've often called it the Scotch drinker's bourbon. It's got a bit more complexity. It's not just about a big hit of wood or like big notes of corn coming through. There's a lot more depth to it. But before I forget, I have a question that I want to ask you a little bit later about the distillation process relating to the core range, but just remind me if I don't bring it up later, because it's not probably the best moment for it right now.
Oh, okay. I will try to remember. Somebody help me try to remember this.
Someone in the
remember.
chat will remember.
Karina,
We got you.
Raven,
We
I
got
need
you.
help to remember
Yeah,
this.
no problem.
But I think that you have keyed on something though. I think there is a house style of Michter's, which is, just sort of this warm, rich, easy drinking whiskey. I'd love to know what people are experiencing, and how many people are already familiar with Michter's.
Great. That's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of them will be. I mean, the Michter's brand, I think, has got a good reputation in our market. And I know it's one of the ones where we have the full range and we try to keep it in stock at all times for people. But just towards the flavor, if you have any comments that you want to share about the whiskeys as we go, tasting notes you've got, please fire them into the chat and we'll be happy to catch up, bring them up as they come about. For me, I think it's about elegance. Like a lot of bourbons I find can be really rough and raw, and the Michter's range has always had a nice balance to it and a nice elegance to it. And I think that's one of the things that I really like about it.
Yeah, so we have 6 philosophies here at Michter's, and I'll come back to the story here in a second of how we, kind of made our journey to where we are now after the family acquired the abandoned trademark. But just to start talking about our philosophies, one of the signature philosophies of Michter's is our low barrel entry strength. So when we come off the still, we're going to come off the still about 69% ABV. And we're going to drop that down to 51.5% ABV entry proof to the barrel. And that's very, very important, because what that means is we're going to be about 75% whiskey in the barrel, about 25% water. So that water, you all will well be aware that water is a powerful hydrolyzer. It will dissolve a lot of beautiful wood sugars and other extractive compounds from the wood that are soluble in water. And so that gives us tremendous advantage in terms of the barrel chemistry, because it acts like a catalyst for a lot of other chemical pathways to begin happening, which is very, very important. One of those things is the fact that there are some compounds that are very astringent, and they are not necessarily soluble in water, but they have some solubility, which then allows them to break apart and then become more subject to oxidation, which then creates the opportunity for a transformational change inside that barrel. So we get a smooth, rich, easy drinking whiskey, something that warms you right here, but it doesn't burn you. We've all had those whiskeys that, like, you have heartburn right here, or it feels like it's burning down to your stomach. It's just not the experience that we're going for. Some people may want that. That's not what we're trying to go for. We just want it to be a really warm, rich experience that, you know, kind of gives you a nice warm embrace, something that you can enjoy. Sometimes I call them my book whiskeys. Like I just want to be able to relax and read and sort of lose myself in a good book and lose myself in a good pour.
Sounds good.
So that's one of the signatures of Michter's. Now, when we come out of wood, after we're ready to dump the whiskey out of the barrel, we actually come out at lower proof. So we're only going to come out about 55 ABV. We actually did the work and we put in at what we can do under the law. So the law allows you to enter into wood up to 62.5 ABV as an experiment. We just did that to compare. And we add over 50% less water at bottling going into wood at 51.5 than if we had gone into the barrel at 62.5 ABV. So we are adding substantially less water at bottling, and that water, you know, is purely dilution at that point. It's not the same as the water being a part of the barrel chemistry and the aging process. So we don't get as many cases at the end, but the cases that we do get, it's a much richer, delicious product. So really, really proud of that. It's one of the things that costs us the most money to do here at Michter's. The law actually changed in 1962. The law used to be the maximum entry proof of a whiskey was 50, let's see, 50, I'm trying to do math, 55% ABV, 110 proof. So 1962, distillers came together and said, we need to find ways to save money because the whiskey business is not doing well. And so they petitioned Congress to increase the entry strength of the spirit into a barrel from 55% ABV to 62.5% ABV, which resulted in opportunities to use less barrels and have less barrel spaces to put those barrels away. So, you know, we still do conform to the old standard that was around long ago.
Are there,
all right,
Andrea,
Go
just
ahead.
a quick question before we move on. To your knowledge, are there many other companies that are putting their whiskey into barrel at lower ABVs like that? Because the standard to me, I think, seems to be most of them are probably putting them in at the max or close to it.
Yeah, it's not very common. We are the lowest entry proof of any distiller of scale. So you think about all the big professional producers out there, we are the lowest. Now, you know, I don't want to speak to the craft movement because there's lots of, you know, interesting things being done by a lot of craft producers, but of any distiller of scale, we are certainly the lowest.
Interesting. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I see in the chat, I can't always read the chat because I'm trying to talk and read and it doesn't always work for me, but I just happened to see someone noting there about another special release out there. And, you know, I think that's one of the powerful statements about Michter's is that the philosophies that we're using, some of them may be used by some people for special releases. Some of them may be used by, you know, companies as a regular part of their process, but you won't find anybody else using all 6 of these philosophies, which is part of what makes Michter's Michter's.
Cool.
So any other questions?
I don't think so. I'll try
bourbon?
and keep an eye on them as they come through. So don't.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. That'd be great. I try, I really do, but sometimes it starts scrolling and then I can't even read it. So, okay. So I think next, as I keep talking, we will move. Now that was a small batch product. So small batch for us, by the way, is only the equivalent of 20 full barrels. So it's very small quantity volume that we're making. There's actually no legal definition for small batch. it actually can be one less than your largest batch. And if your largest batch was 10,000 barrels, it just doesn't seem as cool that maybe your smallest batch is 9,000 barrels. I don't know, I'm not judging. I'm just saying the quantity of our tanks are sized for the equivalent of 20 barrels. So it's very, very small volume. We do not have the luxury of masking off notes because of a large volume of liquid. We have to have a lot of precision every step of the way in terms of how we're managing our product all the way through the process. You may be interested to know, for example, that our warehouses are only 4 floors high. A lot of producers here in Kentucky, the floors are 7 or 8 floors high. And then what happens is your top floors age faster than your bottom floors, and you get all of this deviation in your whiskey throughout your house because things are not aging the same based on the positioning in the house. We are trying to create continuously aging whiskey on all 4 floors that is aging in a similar way. Our warehouse construction is a little bit unique in that it is 14-inch concrete walls with an insulation layer in between. We're a very traditional distiller, very traditional rack storage. But the environment that the warehouse ages in is different. So we try to really maximize and make sure we're getting good air movement, making sure that during the winter months, we're actually heat cycling our warehouses so that we can kind of get this interaction between the wood and the whiskey to increase the maturing quality of the spirit. And we actually put probes in our barrels in every zone of the house and every floor of every house that we have. We collect all that liquid temperature data. We trend it to make sure that everything in the house is aging on the similar profile. So those are just some of the quality control methods that we have, for example, around our warehouses. And I tell people all the time, your warehouse environment really matters. If you just build a warehouse, stick some barrels in it, and come back many years from now, it may or may not work out for you. Really looking after how you construct your warehouses, the type of wood you're using, where are you sourcing the wood from? Are you naturally seasoning and air drying the wood? Are you kiln drying the wood? Are you toasting barrels before you char the barrels? What's your aging program like? Do you have concrete floors? Do you have dirt floors? Do you have good air movement? Do you have high humidity? All of those things can make a difference in how you age out your whiskey. So just wanted to touch on some other things that we're going to come to in a minute.
There's a question in the chat, Andrea, sorry to interrupt, from Tom. He's asking, does Michter's track the humidity in the warehouse as well, or does that matter?
Yes, we do track the humidity in the house, and the humidity does matter because when you think about aging a barrel and you have spirit and you have water inside that barrel. A water molecule is actually smaller than a whiskey molecule. So your water wants to leave the barrel first. If you have a high humid environment, you think about the water trying to come out of the barrel. Well, now it's got to fight against the water in the air, right? So it makes it more difficult for that water to get out, which means you're going to lose alcohol now before you lose water, because the water's busy fighting, trying to get out of the barrel in a high humid environment. So it does make a difference. Kentucky is great for aging because we have, hot, humid summers, but we also have cold, dry winters. So you kind of get, a balance with the environment. Now we also heat cycle in the winter. So, we end up ultimately losing a little bit more than we would like to, but that's just the way, that's the trade-off for the maturing quality that we get from doing it.
Andrea, just a point of clarification. You were talking before, your warehouses are all concrete?
Yes, the one warehouse that we have at our main distillery here, it's actually only 3 floors. It was an add-on. It was our first warehouse here. It is not. It is an insulated warehouse, but all the warehouses that we have built since then have all been concrete with an insulation layer between the wall.
Which is, I mean, perhaps not all, but I mean, most of the ones that are big tourist attractions, they're all, I mean, the rick houses are all, I mean, they're barely separated from the elements by just, you know, rough pieces of wood. So, I mean, that's quite a different, I guess part of that is you just want to have a lot more control over that maturation process. Is that the rationale? Yeah.
That's correct. I mean, we have many windows per warehouse. So, you know, we're still doing the traditional things, you know, during the summer months, we open the windows, you know, those kinds of things. We're still doing to take advantage of the natural environment. But, you know, it does help us manage the temperature of our whiskey and the environment that we're aging in. It's a different style of warehouse for sure. And, you know, it would be more similar to maybe some of the warehouses that you've seen in Kentucky that are not sort of the wood and tin clad, but maybe more the wood and stone, the old stone houses.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, let's taste some more whiskey. So we'll go to the next is the single barrel rye that I was saying, and you all might already be tasting it. But this is 42.4 proof. It is a Kentucky style rye, meaning we stay closer to 51% rye grain in the recipe. And then we supplement the other 49% of the recipe is corn and malted barley. And what we've found is this creates a super smooth, really balanced rye whiskey. I know that we're up against some, you know, beautiful Canadian ryes and such, but I think, you know, what we're trying to represent here is something that is very approachable as a rye whiskey. A lot of rye whiskeys that have been released in the US are very bold, they're very spicy. And if you have the palate for them, it's wonderful. But if you don't, you don't care for it. And it can be polarizing for some people. I always say it's, you know, my thought is it's a bit like a peaty scotch. Either you like it or you don't. And I think we were trying to create something that is more approachable as a rye whiskey that's got some nice caramel, some gentle baking spice, but it's very balanced and very smooth and very easy drinking. And this is a single barrel product. So let me know what you think about that.
Rye is always my favorite to taste people on because, like you were saying, Andrea, so many people either love it or they hate it. And it's my true passion in life to find someone who thinks they don't like it and to change their mind with our rye.
Yeah, it's got a nice balance to it. It's got that typical spicy note. It's got a little bit of that natural oilier body to the spirit that I find also comes with rye. But once again, like it's soft, it's really well balanced. And, you know, rye can be sometimes over the top when it's all on its own. And, you know, it's obviously very high content, but it's not 100%. So you've got other elements there that are kind of toning it down and balancing it out a little bit.
You know how we talk, Andrew, about older peated whiskeys and how they mellow and then peat becomes just a component of it instead of the be all end all kind of thing. It's cool to see a rye kind of like this where those big dill and caraway notes and stuff are kind of held in check, I think, by the wheat and the corn a little bit. It's a little bit more subtle, it's a little bit more pretty, a little bit more elegant.
Yeah, no, thanks for that.
Sorry, Andrew, I don't know if I introduced you because he came in just before we got started, but Kurt's one of our other whiskey guys at the shop. And we've got a question here, someone asking if you can expand on the idea of single barrel. Is there a reason why you decided to do the rye as a single barrel rather than small batch?
So when Joe was actually looking to start this brand after Prohibition, you know, ryes were in an all but dead category. And he had a real vision and real passion for rye. You think about the 90s though, and I will just say the world was a very different place at that time as it related to American whiskey. People didn't put, small batch was not a thing, single barrel was not a thing. No one cared about aged American whiskey expressions. None of these things were really that prominent at that time. But one thing that Joe had a real passion for was rye whiskey. And actually the first release that he wanted to make was 10-year rye. Now, I'll just jump back into a little bit of the history there for a second, because, and I'll come back to the question, but he, they got a trademark. That's all they got. So obviously you've got to do something to start making whiskey. And at that time, because nobody put a value on products and American whiskey was not doing well, and there were plenty of old whiskeys sitting around in warehouses with no future other than to be blended off. So they actually went around the landscape of Kentucky after they made the strategic decision to relocate the brand to Kentucky. And they acquired some great old barrels. They wanted their first release to be a single barrel 10-year rye. The distributors were confused by this because they were like, ryes really don't sell that well. We will take it on maybe if you give us a single barrel 10-year bourbon. So Joe decided the first two releases were 10-year bourbon and 10-year rye, and they were both single barrel products. And so that kind of started the process. And I will just tell you, by the way, Robert Simonson here in the United States, he writes a lot of articles. He wrote one last year, you can look it up, just talking about rye labels. And actually, before Michter's rye, many of the labels were yellow or brown. Michter's introduced the green label for rye, and now many other ryes in the United States also have a green label. So I've always thought that was that was cool to find out. I did not know that until he did the research and wrote the article. So that was kind of fun to learn. But I think it's really just more about the passion that the family has for rye whiskey. Rye was our flagship for a long time. And then with the American whiskey boom and craze, bourbon has kind of moved up the ladder now. But I think just coming back to why, I think it just had to do with the passion that they had for making rye whiskey again.
Mhm.
So.
Cool.
Lots of people got used to Canadian whiskey flooding into the US during Prohibition. So, we had to, unfortunately, some people don't recognize, Prohibition in the US was 13 years long. So during that time, a lot of distillers, went away, a lot of things changed, people's palates changed, a lot happened during that period. And it took many years to revitalize that. But I personally think now, 1964 is when the United States Congress declared bourbon America's native spirit. But I really feel like it's just now that people are starting to recognize what a beautiful product bourbon and rye can be. And, they're enjoying it all over the world. So we're grateful to everybody enjoying our products.
Andrea, I don't know if you knew this, but we had Prohibition in Canada too, but I don't think it lasted 9 months before they realized it was actually a bad idea and they put it into it. So,
yeah, we should have had those people at the helm down here. It would have gone a lot better for us.
yeah. Those are both great expressions. Really cool. Should we move on to the sour mash?
Yeah.
Great.
So, sour mash process we use to make all of these whiskeys. That's the first thing I want to say. The reason why sour mash is on this label and not the others is because before the brand closed in 1989, the best-selling expression was the Michter's Original Sour Mash. Now, it is not a bourbon by definition. It is not a rye by definition, but it has a little sweetness of the bourbon. It has a little gentle spice of the rye. And together it is a super elegant pour, just really smooth, delicious. It's 43% ABV. It was Whiskey of the Year in 2019. And we were really super proud of that because the Whiskey Exchange, which is the world's largest global online retailer, rated it Whiskey of the Year. And, you know, the Whiskey Exchange is in Scotland's backyard. So it was a nice opportunity for us, not only to have the brand be recognized, but also just to recognize that, hey, an American whiskey took the top spot, and that's a signal that the quality of the spirit is very good. So we're very proud of the Sour Mash. It is a lovely drinker. I know you said, Andrew, I think you said this was your favorite.
This is my favorite standard, right? I know you said we can't call it bourbon, but it's my favorite bourbon-esque whiskey, and it still is. It's got a note on the nose that reminds me of old-fashioned sour cream glazed donuts. And I mean, I love the palate. It's easy drinking. It's complex. It's at a good drinking strength, I think, for this one as well, too. It's just really tasty.
Renee is demanding that I unmute and tell everyone what my favorite whiskey is.
Oh,
I don't have a favorite because it's like having a child, even though I only have one. But I always tell the story that the first time I tasted through the lineup was with Joe and Matt. And I said, respectfully, I love every single one of these whiskeys. Bourbon, I know this is like king in Kentucky, but I said, as a Canadian, I grew up drinking rye since I was yay high from my grandpa's glass, a little drink here and there. And I said, I had a sip of this rye and I questioned everything about being Canadian. So I said the rye will always be my favorite from that first time I tried them with Joe and Matt all of those years ago. So even though I don't say I have a favorite, the rye is my favorite.
well, just kind of continuing the journey of, you know, how we got to where we are now. So so Joe acquires some barrels, they release 10-year bourbon, 10-year rye. We call that phase one. But obviously, if you're going to start selling whiskey, then you need to start making whiskey. So they did not yet have the financial resources to build a big distillery at that time. Plenty of production sitting around unused at the time. So they went to a great Kentucky distiller and forged an agreement for producing our recipe. And what I always like to remind people is people throw around this term contract distillation, and certainly it was that, but it was a very different time. So, you know, we were able to be involved in the process. And the reason why that's so important is because we were able to acquire all of our distilling standards. So every time we ran a distillate run, we got a standard, and we created a catalog of those standards. And then when we got to phase three, which was the full build out of our distillery here in Louisville, then we were able to refer back to those standards, which was very, very important because the goal was to be as good as phase two, if not better. So, we're very proud, all of these whiskeys that you're tasting, the bourbon, the rye, the sour mash, and the American have all been produced here at our distillery in Louisville, Kentucky, and we're very, very proud of that.
You've preempted the question I wanted to ask, but wanted to wait. I wanted to know if that tipping point was coming or had come. So obviously it has already come, where you're now your
Yes.
four ranges from your own production.
Yeah, and these are going to be between 5 and 7 years old. We give ourselves some flexibility. That's why we say 5 to 7, because we choose barrels for bottling based on their readiness from a quality perspective. So that's how we operate our business. This is not a distillery that 4 years in a day it goes to the bottling line. You know, a lot of people do that because you don't have to claim the age. Once it's 4 years old, you don't have to claim the age on the bottle. We actually take the time to curate what we want that liquid to be and how we want it to be experienced by the consumer. And we are very rigorous about the protocols involved to match that, because you know, when I was a child, I was always taught, you know, this is lemonade stand sales, everybody. Let me just tell you that when you sell at the lemonade stand, your lemonade better be good the first time if you want a repeat customer. And I think that's a very important lesson that I was taught very early, because as a child who likes to make things and always try to innovate and change and do all these things, it was always like, you know what, the classic is really what people want, and you know, you need to make it really well. And so that's always stuck with me, and I think that that is a really important part of our culture here. Everything we do, we are operating with a quality mindset, not a quantity mindset. We don't cut corners. We sometimes have to wait for things, but we're very proud. So all of these are going to be between 5 and 7 years old.
Matthew's just asking clarification. So at this point, it's not that you're blending the two. This is now just purely your own production from, your Louisville distillery.
That's correct.
Or I should say your main distillery, because you actually have a small distillery now as well too.
Yeah, so this distillation system here, this is in the Shively section of Louisville. It's about 10 minutes from downtown Louisville. And we started this distillery up in August of 2015. So we're 8 years into production here in our Shively operation at this point. Now, the Fort Nelson distillery, which you're mentioning, that we brought online in January of 2019. We were open for a year, and then we had to close down for the pandemic. But that facility houses our pot still and fermentation system that was originally located in Pennsylvania. So we were able to acquire those stills. Now we operate 2 distilleries, but we have not released anything from Fort Nelson at this time. That is a pot still distillation system versus the distillation system we have here in our Shively operation, which is the whiskeys you're tasting are all from a column still operation. Just to talk about the distillery for a second, we use all U.S. Department of Agriculture graded #1 grain. A lot of distillers will use #2. We believe in getting the highest quality ingredients, so we only use #1 grade, and we are all non-GMO here. We have great family farmers that supply us. We always say we can't live without our great family farmers, and we certainly can't sell anything without folks like Kensington or customers like you all. So we're very grateful for that. So let's go. Before we do the unblended American whiskey, can we just do the toasted sour mash real quick? Because it might be kind of fun to compare the sour mash to the toasted sour mash. So we'll just skip the American for just 1 second. So just make sure you've got the toasted sour mash. So we were the first to release a toasted American whiskey product here in the United States. And we're very proud of that, because basically what we do is we take the base product, so the sour mash, we make it, we age it 5 to 7 years, and then we take it out of barrel and we put it in a toasted only barrel for a short period of time. Now, the first toasted release we did was toasted bourbon. Then we did toasted barrel strength, barrel finish rye. Then we did toasted sour mash, which was the third in the release so far. It is also 43% ABV, so you can compare the sour mash and the toasted version of the sour mash. It is I want to talk about the wood for a second. So while you're tasting this, I'm very curious to hear what people think about the comparison between the sour mash and the toasted sour mash. But the whole idea of toasting is to bring forward extractives from the wood. Working with American white oak alone, there are over 100 different compounds that you can extract from the wood. Those compounds break down at different temperatures and different amounts of time. And so defining a toast profile for this product becomes very important. But I will back up for just a minute to say, how do we start with the wood in the very beginning? So when you have a white oak tree, it's over 60% of its weight in water. So you've got to get a lot of that free water out of the wood, and you have a choice. You can go to the kiln and get your wood physically dried, and then the coopers will make your barrel. Or you can naturally season and air dry the wood outside in stacks that have been precisely engineered and placed to get good airflow and to be managed in a yard. Now, when they're in this yard, they're not only physically drying, but they're chemically and microbiologically changing. So you're leaching out different compounds that you don't want, that can be astringent and bitter and green and just not desirable. And what you're also doing is you're growing fungi on the wood that then produces enzymes that metabolize different wood compounds, but then allows beautiful aromatics to come forward from the wood. So you get more benefits from the natural seasoning and air drying process. All of our wood is naturally seasoned and air dried for at least 18 months. Now, some projects, we naturally season and air dry the wood longer, 2 years, 3 years, sometimes up to 5 years. And by doing that, again, it's sort of getting rid of things we don't want and exposing things we do want. Once the wood is ready, then we're going to have the coopers toast it to our specifications and then char it. Charring is the act of physically igniting the interior of the barrel. You've seen barrels go up in flames. Typically, the char level is somewhere from a flash char up to maybe a char 4. You possibly can get a char 5 done, but no matter what, you're not going to be more than a minute, 20, 30 seconds of charring at the highest level. Whereas toasting takes hours, it's sort of low and slow. And you've got this little white oak fire, you've got the barrel over it, it's radiating heat out towards the wood at certain temperatures for certain amounts of time. You break down different compounds, and then when that whiskey moves in and out of the capillaries of the wood, it starts to be transformed by those extractive compounds from the wood. So that's sort of the natural seasoning and air drying, the toasting before charring. And we do that for all of our barrels. All of our barrels get that treatment. Now, when we make the toasted product, we take it out of the first barrels that were naturally seasoned and air dried for at least 18 months, toasted and charred. The whiskey's been aged for 5 to 7 years. Then we take it out and we put it in a second toasted only barrel for a finishing process. So that's kind of some of the other philosophies that Michter's uses. So to this point, we've talked about single barrel and small batch and how small our batches are. We talked about the low entry strength into the barrel, which really creates a smooth, rich whiskey. We talked about the natural seasoning and air drying of the wood for at least 18 months, sometimes up to 5 years. And we talked about the toasting before charring. And we mentioned the heat cycling as well that we do in the warehouses during the winter months. So we have one more philosophy to talk about, but I want to hear what people think about the toasted sour mash.
We had a question here, Andrea,
Oh, yeah.
on the mash bill for the rye. You can touch on that for them.
Oh,
Okay.
The mash bill, so the mash bill for the sour mash, sorry.
It's the same with, I think the question was whether they thought they got more rye, the rye in the mash bill, wondering like, it's going to be the same between the sour mash and the toasted barrel sour mash.
So yes, it's the same product recipe, but there are two things. Toasting can allow more extractives, which I think is also kind of helping you to influence the sour mash product. So the sour mash in its original form, for me, is very elegant. I think the toasted version actually brings forward maybe a little more smokiness to it, and kind of brings an interesting, and somebody's using it right here, like a wood spice, which I think is really interesting to the product. So that may be what you're picking up.
It's more decadent and more spicy, I think. But I'm really torn. Like, I love the sour mash. It's got a simple elegance to it. I think the nose on it is better than the toasted version, but the toasted version, the palate is just, it's rich, it's fun. There's lots of layers to it. So I know, I'm like Kurt, I'm not sure I could pick between them. I really like them both.
I think I definitely lean towards the sour mash, going back and forth a few times. There's a slight, almost mesquite sort of note on the toasted. It kind of reminds me of Montana rough stock. I don't know if you remember from years back. Obviously, a much better version. But I think the reason I lean towards that first one is, I'm a Scotch guy like you, Andrew, but I'm also an unapologetic Michter's fanboy. It's become like a mantra. Like, this is my go-to. This is my go-to. This is my go-to. First place we go every time we go to the wall is the Michter stuff. So there's like a DNA and the spirit I'm looking for that I've fallen hard for. And I think it's a little bit overshadowed by the barrel toasting on the toasted.
That's the risk, I guess, of that secondary finishing in a fresh cask, is you're gonna maybe potentially overshadow some of the spirit.
But that's
Yeah,
just preference. That's not saying I don't want both. That's just which one I prefer.
Sorry, Andrew, did you were saying?
Toasting is it's very powerful. It can really be very transformative to a spirit. And the toasted sour mash is actually one of the harder toast that we do, because you want to try to sit them side by side, and you want to be able to say, oh, right, okay, I understand the sour mash. Oh, I see this is the toasted version of that. And there's some connection. Whereas some toast that you would choose would just completely dominate it, and you would think it was a completely different whiskey. And of course, you can't argue that. But what we're trying to do is choose a toast that just influences the spirit in more subtle ways, but that you still kind of have some reflection on what the original product is. So it's actually quite hard to do. But I think it is a lovely representation. And it's fun. And, for me, I think it's like, if you had a great charcuterie board, it kind of really brings out like this smoked honey and a little bit of savory and spice. And it's just kind of fun.
What I think one of the things Michter's has done really well as a brand is you have your core range, and you've got 4 options within your core range for people to choose from, but it's that dribbling out these limited offerings of something a little different. And, sure, you might repeat them every couple of years or so, but it's kind of revives interest in the brand as a whole. And I think it's a good approach. It's an approach I've seen done by a handful of Scottish distilleries that, wanted to grow their brand, and I think it works. So doing these one-offs, there's definitely interest in them, and people want, like, they know about them long before we're going to get them, and they start asking, and I think it works to kind of just lift up the whole brand.
All right, so we'll jump. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to mention a couple of the comments in here about people's feedback. Renee said, definitely found it sweeter. And John said sweeter, definitely more vanilla and banana. people are definitely torn. They're saying, what did John say? He liked that it was more forward on the nose with the toasted, with the rye, kind of came in a little bit more. A lot of great comments.
Mhm.
Somebody says
Yeah,
they
I
would like
see
to
the
try a
BB King
mesquite
comment.
smoked Michter.
I saw BB King in concert several times, so I love the references there and one having more swagger.
Yeah.
But it's fun. I mean, I think that's what we're going for with the toasted series is you may prefer the base spirit, but a lot of people really enjoy the toasteds. We typically release the toasteds in the fall of the year. So for us, that's the September's Bourbon Heritage Month here in Kentucky. So that's usually the timeline that we're releasing a toasted release.
Cool.
So we'll go to the unblended American whiskey. This is 41.7% ABV. This is our lowest ABV whiskey that we make. We make this by taking our spirit and putting it in two different types of barrels. We put it in our new toasted and charred barrels, and we put some in our used bourbon barrels. So we age them and then we bring them back together. The opportunity there is to add a little bit more sweetness to the product, which we think is fun. The signaling of the unblended is just to signal that it's an all whiskey product. It doesn't have anything else but water to adjust the proof. There's no color, there's no flavor, there's no grain neutral spirits or essentially vodka. And that is the distinction between it being a blended whiskey and an unblended American whiskey, because blended whiskeys really only have to be 20% whiskey in the bottle. The other 80% can have all kinds of other stuff in it. So we want it to be unblended to signify that we're an all whiskey product. The only difference is we've used some used bourbon barrels. It is a bourbon style product.
So just to make a bad joke, this is not a flavor extension then.
No.
No, I that's such a fascinating thing to think about, because the term blended to people outside of American whiskey would just ease. So I've never even noticed that before. I always focused on what this was and the style, but I've never even noticed that unblended word there. But it's kind of key to signaling what this is, that it's still proper whiskey.
Mm-hmm. I think it's nice, it's sweet. I actually keep this in the refrigerator at home, cold. Changes the spirit just slightly, but it's just a nice summer pour, like something you can enjoy. You don't have to think about it. It's got nice sweetness. It's a good after dinner drink, especially if like you're doing a cookout or something. It's just a nice summer pour.
Kurt, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this one, because this was always the least favorite of mine of the whole lineup, but I'm actually enjoying this more than I remembered previously.
I have a real soft spot for this one. So I'm with you. Sour Mash is my favorite in the range, and they're probably the bourbon and this guy. But this one kind of has my heart a little bit, because one of my closest friends who passed on a couple of years ago, a good friend of Anders too, and probably a few other people in this group here, Jay Wheelock used to rep the brand, and he and I used to.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, I know Wheelock. Yeah.
Yeah, Jay
I
and I used to spend a lot of time drinking this whiskey out on my back deck. So it's got that that sentimentality for me, and it immediately transports me to some of those conversations we had and everything. So this one will always maybe be the nearest and dearest to my heart, but Sour Mash probably my taste buds.
Yeah.
This one
Jay's
is
a
a
great
really
guy.
wonderful gateway as well. So if you're like trying to get a friend or someone interested in American whiskey and they think it's not their jam, this is always where I start people, because it's soft enough that people can really dig through their palates and find all of those different nuances. But it's so soft. It's got a lower ABV, so it's just a little bit less intimidating for people who don't drink a lot of whiskey.
really nice balance struck on this one. Like it just hits the palate right. The nose is gentle enough. It's not bad. It can't pull back and prickle or anything. Like you nailed it with like the problem we have all the time is when we talk to people with entry level whiskeys, they want entry level price point, but they don't want entry level flavors because that's a deterrent. Nobody wants that. If you drink an entry level whiskey, generally they're rubbish. That's why they're entry level. So this is one of those ones that gives us like fair price point, a fair approachable profile for a lot of people, and the quality level is like head and shoulders above. Anyways, I'm not gonna knock other brands.
Premium entry level.
Yeah, that's right. We'll speak to Michter's, not to anybody else.
Thank you so much. That's kind.
Thank you.
No, well, I mean, Kurt said this. I know Harmony's on there too. Like truly, the brand is probably amongst the staff one of the favorites, if not the favorite in the shop, because there is a focus on quality. You've talked about it already tonight about even though it costs you more money in the long run, filling at a lower ABV because it creates the style that you like. And you have to add less water at the end. A lot of these different elements, I think, play into it. And, maybe it'll also cut some slack for some other people that are taking a similar approach. Like not everybody can afford to build a distillery from scratch, but they're building a brand and the plan is in the long term to do something else with it. You guys are a case study in how to transition and do that successfully and seamlessly. I don't know that I would have noticed a difference between the sour mash that you've made yourselves versus the one that came out of your contract distillery before it. So it's great whiskey.
Yeah. No, I think that, I appreciate you saying that because I've been inspired by the family, by their story. What people have to remember is, people are coming to American whiskey as producers by the dozens. Like, I feel like I pick up a whiskey magazine and all of a sudden there's another celebrity's doing a whiskey brand, or there's some other new American whiskey, and it's a wonderful thing. I love to see American whiskey booming because it wasn't always that way in my time and in my career. It hasn't always been this way. Things have changed dramatically. But you think about the time back in the 90s, they were doing something against all odds. No one wanted to pick up American whiskey. It just wasn't a lucrative time to get into this business. And so that it's through their passion and their perseverance that they've worked really hard to build a global brand. And more than that, to build a consistent, repeatable, high quality brand. And it is just, it's a wonderful whiskey product, and there's something for everyone, which it seems like people are jumping ahead now, Harmony, to the 10. So I will say that the 10-year bourbon is 47.2 proof, and I honestly agree with you, Harmony. I think it is like one of the best noses. I could just sit here and keep nosing it. Eventually I want to drink it, but it is very enchanting nose. Just like taking the lid off of my glass, I'm like, oh my God.
Starting to get real jealous over here.
Yeah, well, that's
sorry, Raven. Sorry.
Raven, I'm pretty sure you'll find a way to get to taste some 10-year-old at some point anyway. So well, Andrea, should we move on to the 10-year-old?
Yes. So one of the so the 10-year product in 2022, we sat down to prepare for 2023, and 2021 to decide for 2022. And we said, really, if we hold this whiskey a year longer, it will be absolutely brilliant. I will tell you that Joe said he thought it was great. It's no reflection on him. It was great. Dan and I have a strong opinion that our goal every day is to make the best American whiskey we can. Whether we are or not, people will judge that. But our goal is, if we know something to make it better, our job is to make it better. Make the best that we can. So what we said to the family was, yeah, it's great. It's great. But part of the experience of drinking a Michter's 10 is it needs wow factor. Like, you want people to have a memorable experience. You want them to be like, oh my gosh, like, my hope is tonight you all taste this and you're like, I remember when I tasted Michter's 10 on this event tonight with Andrew and Kurt and everybody else here and Harmony. This was amazing. I mean, that's what we want. So the depth, the complexity, that memorable moment, we want to be the best it can be. And so we decided to hold the whiskey. We did. And we released it. We did not have a 10-year bourbon release in 2022. We released it in 2023. And it has been, really enjoyable. So this is a Michter's 2023 Kentucky straight bourbon. It's our single barrel 10-year rye, or our 10-year bourbon. It is an exceptional product. And I don't mind saying that to you because I think it is really just a beautiful liquid. We overage our 10-year products. So it's not 10 years in a day and we send it to the bottling line. The way it works is we look at our planning horizon. As the whiskeys are laid down, they're all aging in a similar fashion. We look and see what we have and we pick the best in the moment for that release. We do not, oh, these barrels are good, we should hold them for the 10-year. Oh, these barrels are good, we should hold them for the 20-year. Whatever we look at between 10 years old and 20 years old is up for the 10-year bourbon. We've had whiskeys in here 18 years old, 15 years old, 13, 14. We've had, we overage our 10-year bourbons and 10-year ryes, and they are beautiful. They are not overly oaked. They are complex. They are dynamic. They're beautiful.
I agree entirely with you about it not being over oaked. And I think I remember the time back in the time when we'd have Pappy Van Winkle 23 on the shelf. And it was a nuisance because I had to buy it a dozen bottles at a time and it took forever to sell. This is going back about 20 years now. And I never understood the hype about it because anytime I ever tried it, I always felt it was like way too witty. It was over the hill. It was just extremely drying. And the one thing I'll say about the 10 and the 20 from Michter's is that I've always felt that, they're starting to show some maturity, but they're not, as you said, over the hill. They're not over oaked and they've got a good balance to them. And I can also remember a time about 7 or 8 years ago when the 10-year-old, we could have it whenever we wanted it because the world hadn't fully discovered it yet. And I don't know when that tipping point happened, but it happened. And the sad reality is, like, the demand for these things now far outstrips the supply.
Yeah, we've been very grateful. And, I always try to tell people the perspective from us as human beings. You can imagine how challenging it was to have to say, this is our recommendation. And then have a family support you in your position to hold the whiskey. But then comes the time to release the product and sort of, first of all, what are people going to say when you don't do the release? And then how's it going to go when you do the release? Both of those things are very stressful. We believe in what we're doing. We're very confident in the process of making whiskey. We love what we do. There's tremendous passion by this entire team and what we do. But it's still, we're human beings. And I can honestly say, when we made the decision not to release the 10-year bourbon in 2022, people were like, oh, okay, we'll wait. It was very respectful because Michter's has made a reputation, or at least I believe Michter's has made a reputation for creating quality whiskey and creating that essential quality value for the consumer. Like, I want you to spend your hard-earned money on this product, but I want you to have a great experience when you get it. Not like, oh, I wish I hadn't spent my money. We want you to be like, wow, I'm so glad I got this. I'm so excited about it. And that's what we want people to have. But the feedback on the release has been phenomenal, and we're very, very proud of it. So hope you all are enjoying it.
It takes a lot of integrity as a brand to decide not to release something that you could sell regardless, because you feel it needed more time. I mean, I'll give kudos to that. Kurt, any thoughts on this one you want to share before we move on?
Yeah, in just one sec, I just want to harken back to something because I think it's really important that everybody here kind of gets it. Something Andrea said earlier, I think it was referring to the first bourbon we had tonight, that small batch, less than 20 barrels kind of thing, where I think, Andrea, you referred to something about not being able to hide any of those, the weaker barrels kind of thing. I paraphrase, of course.
Yeah.
But we talk about that in the shop a lot when we talk about some of the big brands. Their whiskeys tend to be rather flawless, but a lot of times really, really boring. But when you've add together tons and tons of barrels, you can hide some of those duds. When you get into the small batch stuff, you really, really can't. And I think that speaks volumes to the quality of what they're seeing in each cask they're putting together. And that kind of takes us to where we are now. I said it in the comments a minute or two ago. Stunning. This is that whiskey that carries those kind of tropical tones on it that we hunt for in older whiskeys and stuff. You find it in a lot of well-matured Scotch whiskeys and stuff like that, 20, 30 years ex-bourbon barrels kind of deal. It's cool to see it married to a profile that tends to be a little bit more boisterous, but it's been tamed here. It's elegant. I want to spend a ton of time drinking this whiskey, and that would mean I would need a lot more bottles of it. So if you're looking to do some trades, I'm your guy. Call this guy.
Yeah, and there were comments in the chat about hoping to see it on the shelves here. I mean, the reality is, with things like this, where demand goes, I think a lot of it ends up going into bars so that people can go in and multiple people can have a chance to buy them. Incidentally, there will be an email tomorrow morning. We do have a handful, no, not a handful. We have a couple bottles of the 10 and a handful of bottles of the Toasted Barrel Sour Mash that we're offering exclusively to participants in tonight's tasting. So you'll get that email tomorrow, but that's the only way you're going to get some. You're not going to come into our shop and sadly find this on the shelf because, as I said, the demand just far outstrips the supply on it. So, which I think is a nice, neat little transition into the 20-year, which is a bit more of a hot potato and even harder to come by. And it's very rare for any bourbon producer to have 20-year-old whiskey, but for it to be as balanced, elegant, and complex as the Michter's 20, I think is pretty special. So, Andrea, why don't we move on to that one?
All right. Well, so this is very special to me. I don't get to drink the 20 all the time, contrary to what others might think, but it's 57.1 ABV. And I want you to think about that when you drink this product, because personally, I don't think it drinks 57.1 fruit or strength. It is a big whiskey, though. It is a big, bold whiskey. It is a symphony of flavor. You are going to have a lot coming at you all at the same time. But I really do want people to really stop and take the time to manage through this whiskey. If you can, take a sip, but then let it sit for a few minutes and just let it open up and really experience what this whiskey has to offer, because it is really exceptional. It is another example. For years, I've heard people say, oh, you can't have an aged American whiskey. You hear people say, oh, 8 to 10 years is the sweet spot. Oh, 10 to 12 years is the sweet spot. Oh, 12 to 15 years is the sweet spot. But you never hear anybody say, oh my God, 20-year is the sweet spot. You just don't hear that. You don't hear anything about 25. You don't hear anything about American whiskeys aged 30 years. You can age up an American whiskey, but it's all about the choices that you make. You can't just stick a barrel in a warehouse and hope 20 years later it's going to be good. You got to pay attention to the details. You got to think about what you're doing. You got to think about the final product that you really want it to be. And I'm very, very proud of the 20-year bourbon and what it represents for us. It has a beautiful maturity, but it is absolutely not overly oaked. Some of these whiskeys are like wood bombs. They're just too tannic. They're too much to take on. But this really has a lot of beautiful flavor that will linger on your palate. So I would just like to say cheers to everyone. This is an amazing pour. In 2022, this went up for auction. We didn't put it up for auction. Somebody put a bottle of 20-year in a Sotheby's auction and it sold for $27,500, one bottle. So it is an amazing pour. So thank you for sharing it with me tonight. It is my honor. Cheers to you.
Cheers. On that note, again, I want to just say one more time, a huge thank you to Authentic Wine and Spirits, and in particular, James Bourne, who did pop up on here for a moment, but then rightly went back to vacation, which is where he's supposed to be right now. Because the only reason we have this available for tonight's tasting is due to James and Authentic. And the first tasting of this that we did with Raven, I think in November last year, which sold out really quickly, and there was a bunch of disappointed people. This tasting was all about remedying that and making sure that the people who missed out had a chance to go through and do this. So truly a huge thank you to James and Authentic, because it's their generosity that made this available. I'm pretty sure James just went out and found a bottle of this that he knew where there was a bottle of this kicking around, and that's how this came about. So big thank you for that. I mean, it's got some maturity to it, but it's far from over the hill. I mean, maybe this is an opportunity, Andrea, to maybe briefly touch on, you have an even older whiskey than this that you release in very limited quantities. Is this the same stock that eventually becomes that like I think I'm talking about the Celebration Sour Mash. Is that the one?
So Celebration Sour Mash, it's actually right here behind me, this here. It is an amazing product. So in 2013, we said, you know what, there's not really any aged American whiskeys out there. You have all these fine scotches and cognacs that have a lot of age on them, but they're also blends, you know. So the goal was, well, why can't we have an American whiskey that's as good as some of the finest cognacs and scotches in the world, which are blends? So they set out to do that by blending together bourbon and rye. And we did the first Celebration release in 2013. Each release is completely rare, in that whiskey cannot be made again. So that's really particular. We'll do Celebration again, but each whiskey release is very unique. We did it in 2013, 16, 19, and then we bottled again this release in 2022. But unfortunately, the packaging, we did a packaging redesign, and the packaging didn't come in until 23. So we didn't end up releasing it till February of 23. The liquid was bottled in 22. It is the culmination of 4 barrels of rye, 3 barrels of bourbon, all over the age of 12 and over the age of 30 years old. And there were only 328 bottles created for the world. It's exceptional in that it's something so rare, but it's so beautifully curated. It takes us about a year to put the Celebration product together. It is a lot of work to try to figure out whiskeys that are going to marry together. and that are going to be something more special together than they were individually. And it is something that is really a project that's more artistry than it is scientific. And it's just amazing to be a part of it. It is really an honor to work with such aged whiskeys, and really, really proud to be a part of the celebration product. So again, you know, I feel like some of the things with Michters, like you tasted the 10-year bourbon, full of flavor, a lot going on. Like a lot of times people will say, oh, I need barrel strength to get, you know, flavor. I want my barrel strength product, and barrel strengths are beautiful. They really are. And certainly the strength can underpin the flavor experience. Absolutely, no question. However, the 10-year bourbon, a great example. You don't have to have a big strength in order to get a lot of flavor and a lot of complexity. And we're really proud of that. Similarly, with the 10 and the 20, you don't have to experience oak and tannin and all this, you know, sort of the less desirable characteristics. You can really experience full body, full flavor with a lot of complexity without having that overly oaked experience as well. So we're very proud to be able to share this kind of a product with the marketplace, and also just kind of debunk some of the myths that are out there that you can't do it. No, you can. It's just, you know, making whiskey is a complicated series of things that have to happen over time. And each one of the decisions points is a decision tree. And so, you know, there's a lot to look after in the discipline of making whiskey. And that's part of the beauty of it too. Not everybody's doing it the same way, but we're very proud of this release.
So Andrea, what you just said kind of triggered something that in my mind, I think is worth touching on for a moment, which is that, you know, you've got Dan who's responsible for the distillation and you're responsible for the maturation side of things. And the best whiskey companies in the world, and I'm going to put on the Scotch side of things, Gordon MacPhail out there is probably one of the best whiskey companies in the world because they're so keyed into the importance of the cask and maturation, but also deciding at various junctions where something fits into their portfolio. Is this a cask that has the potential to mature 10, 20, 30, 50, 80 years? Or is this something that's maturing quickly and needs to get put into production sooner than later so that we get it at its best? It's interesting to me that Michter's has got a philosophy where you have the master distiller, but you've also got the master of maturation, whose, I'm presuming, job it is to decide what stream casks go into at certain points.
Yeah, I mean, I don't do anything by myself. Dan would say the same thing. You know, we have an incredibly talented team of people here, but that is exactly right. I mean, I'm looking after everything from the point that it gets turned over for quality check, for entry into the barrel, all the standards we apply to our cooperages, and that includes global cooperages as well. You know, making sure that our specifications are being met consistently and repeatedly. You know, we request all of the data from our cooperages to ensure and validate. You know, it's sort of the trust but validate principle. We want to make sure that everything is being done with precision. We want to make sure that we're aging things to the quality that we want them to be. We want to ensure that our warehouses and the heat cycling philosophies are being done, you know, the way we want them done. We want to make sure that we're sourcing oak from the regions that are going to give us the highest flavor, because we want, you know, extra fine grain versus coarse grain. All of these little things matter. And it may seem like just a lot, but there are many, many things. And it's the consistency to which you look after all of these variables that are
Mhm.
going to get you, you know, to land in the place that you want. You know, there is a lot of science here, but there's also a lot of art. You know, when we take the distillate, we're designing the barrels to achieve an end goal. You know, when you get the distillate, maybe it's got fruit and floral and some corn and some oiliness. Well, what do you want to do with it? Do you want it to lift the fruit? Do you want to add some spice? Do you want to bring in some caramel and vanilla? Do you want some tropical flavors? Do you want, you know, chocolate, espresso? What do you want? And then you design your barrel accordingly to be able to influence the flavor profile of that spirit over time. And really go, you know, we spend a lot. Cooperages don't naturally season and air dry and hold your oak for at least 18 months up to 5 years for free. I would love it if they did, but they don't. You know, they got to hold that wood on their balance sheet for a long time. So it costs additional money for that. It costs additional money for the toasting before charring. There's a skill that goes into toasting barrels, and you know, you got to pay for that too. So all of these incremental processes that we're doing cost us, but you know, we really get significant, you know, value out of the process. So like, for example, if I just show you this, and I don't know how well you all can see this,
We can
but
see
you
it
can
well.
see how the whiskey has penetrated deep into this stave. That's because of the natural seasoning and air drying, the toasting and charring. It's going to penetrate a lot deeper and a lot faster into that stave, which is going to get us a lot more interaction with that wood earlier in the process of aging, which then is a catalyst for other things to start happening, which is really important. If I just show you all, and I'm going to try to do this with grace, I'm going to try to do it, but these are all samples. And if you just look, with the clear liquid being the distillate, and then moving across, the last bottle on my left is 2 years old. The very last bottle is 6. So you can see there's not a huge color difference at 2 years old to 6 years old. It is different, but it's already dark and rich at 2 years old. That's a pretty powerful thing. There's no color. There's no color additive in, you know, bourbon and rye and the whiskeys we're producing. So we're getting all of that from the wood. You know, people think the char layer is just to really filter internally the whiskey as you move in and out of the capillaries of the wood, but it's actually accentuating flavor. You can accentuate your fruit ester and your spice with lighter chars. You can really bring forward coffee and dark characters, chocolates and so forth, and you know, with darker chars. So you can do all of these wonderful things, but it's an artistic project and really creating something really special. So I get all excited. You can see my passion coming through here, but I really do think that it is an amazing thing that we work for a whiskey company that has recognized that there are, you know, I look at barrels as an ingredient. They're an ingredient to the process. You cannot make American whiskey without the barrel. The barrel is an ingredient to the overall process of making great whiskey. So.
I agree. I know Kurt and I have geeked out and talked about some of these things too, but I always find it like almost a little odd that when they talk about like what are the ingredients to make whiskey, they never mention oak, but I mean, it's instrumental, like it has to be there. And then the other one is copper. Like without copper, you don't have good whiskey. I mean, they're both instrumental to the process. One last quick question, just staying in this vein for a moment. How frequently are you monitoring individual casks over their lifespan to decide or tweak where maybe you're going to put them? Is that something that is part of the program?
Yeah, so we do maturing sampling twice a year. And, not every single barrel is getting sampled twice a year. But we're trying to make sure that we're getting a representation of how all of our whiskey is aging up. We're cataloging it, we're recording those, quality assessments, et cetera, just so that we're monitoring the process as we go. Again, we are not good at leaving things to chance. We really like to be very precise in how we're managing. Before we ever send anything to the bottling floor, we're always, tasting, selecting well in advance of those barrels being removed from the house, because again, we have a wide range that we can be choosing from. But I think it's also important for people to understand when we process our whiskey, and might be kind of corny, but I refer to our people in our processing department as chefs. They're like processing chefs. They are making sure that the specifications of our liquid are met each and every time. They're tasting the liquid before it's bottled to make sure that it meets our specification, it meets the standard, it meets the consumer's expectation. I don't know anybody else doing this.
Yeah.
Like it's not efficient, it's time consuming, there's a lot to it, but it's really, really important. And I value the team for putting the energy in to make sure that, we're not delivering something that's, well, it's kind of Michter's and, it's kind of good. We want it to be really good, and we want every bottle to be really good. And that's really important to us. And, the last philosophy I haven't even talked about is the customized chill filtration. So chill filtration in the Scotch world may have, a great education around it. And, it may have a bad reputation in terms of what it can do. It absolutely can impact color, flavor, aroma, all those different things. But what Michter's is doing is we are customizing the process to really accentuate every whiskey's best characteristics. These whiskeys have long chain compounds, they have short chain molecules, they're very complex, they have a lot going on, and we're using American white oak for the first time. And oh, by the way, with all these other treatments that we're using, we have a really rich, flavorful barrel that's imparting a lot to these whiskeys. The opportunity for us is to customize the chill filtration. And I would argue with anyone, because people will say, you can't preserve texture, you can't preserve flavor, you can't, all these can'ts because of their view of chill filtration. It's like, no, you really can. But again, it's about the skillful process of what you're doing and understanding it and using science to your advantage to create something really beautiful. And I think, whether you agree or disagree with custom or chill filtration, we customize the process at Michter's. Bourbons are not filtered the same as ryes, are not filtered the same as 10 or 20 or any of those things. But what we're doing is we really believe in it. We really do believe it accentuates each individual whiskey's flavor profile. So we're really proud of that. So it sounds like Andrea might have to go.
No, I just want to spare everyone the noise.
So, but anyway, it's been an honor to share time with you all. This has been an absolutely amazing tasting and experience. I've enjoyed it very much. I hope, maybe some folks have learned some things about Michter's, and but I'm happy to take any final questions.
Yeah.
And
The good news is the fire alarm is over. We have an overly sensitive alarm. If the oven's on and something's steaming, it for some reason triggers the fire alarm. Anyway, Andrea, just going back to what you're saying, I mean, probably some of the comments you made in the last 5 minutes are some of the most interesting things that we've heard tonight. And I'm glad you went down that path, because a lot of the people on this tasting love geeking out about whiskey. They love hearing these things. And again, to draw a parallel again, I remember back before they started bottling everything at 46, Gordon MacPhail used to talk about how they chill filtered, but they were always very careful to say that they only lightly did it. Like they were doing it because they had to in order to bottle at the strengths they have, but they were very conscious of the effects it could have on the spirit and being careful about it. And what I think is interesting about that, and just the brand, the company as a whole, for people to understand here, is that you're in this weird spot between being craft and macro. Like you're not small, but you're not large. And I think there's something really endearing to me about that, because you have, you've got enough product that you can spread it around the world and offer people something good, but not so much that you can go out and try to pretend that you're going to compete with the Jim Beams and the Maker's Marks and the Buffalo Traces of the world. And maybe that's something that's worth kind of acknowledging to people, is that you're not an enormous distillery, you're medium-sized, but that with that comes the opportunity to focus on quality rather than quantity.
Yeah, it's certainly how we compete in the marketplace. I mean, we're never going to be the biggest. We're certainly not the smallest, exactly like you said. But we're a quality-driven company. We are not going to sacrifice our quality just to get more bottles. We continue to demonstrate that over and over and over again, and I think that is what continues to help us build this brand, is that people, even for the first time, they're coming to know Michter's, and they, become a Michter's adorer, and 5 years from now, they're still drinking Michter's, and they're like, oh, I love my Michter's. It's always what I want it to be. And the special releases get people excited. They love the differences, and there's something for everyone. There's something for every occasion. It's fun to taste through a whiskey tasting of Michter's portfolio tonight. And, I'm not, I haven't had the 20 in a while, so it's a great honor to be able to taste the 20, but I'm not tasting the 20 every day. I'm drinking, Michter's Bourbon and Rye. I love them. I put the rye in cocktails. I drink the bourbon neat, and they're delicious whiskeys. And so I'm really, really, I can't say enough about the team here and what we've been able to achieve, but we're also producing, the next generation of producers that we want to have the same passion to carry for Michter's, into the future, long into the future. So, yeah.
Awesome. All right. I'm going to fire up the poll here, which I'm pretty sure Evan created. Hopefully it works. Now, obviously we tasted the American whiskey slightly out of order, but that poll is going to be up for the next 2 or 3 minutes. Unfortunately, Raven, Karina, Andrea, you don't get to vote because you're flagged as co-hosts. We'll give you a chance to tell us your favorites in a second. Before we, move on to anything else, though, it did come up in the chat, and I was planning to mention it. Phil and Suzanne, who are joining us from Toronto, it's their 36th wedding anniversary today, so happy anniversary, Phil and Suzanne. Thanks for spending your anniversary with us.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah. So, Karina, I'm going to start with you just because you already let the cat out of the bag earlier. But if you had to pick 2 favorites, we already know your first favorite is the rye. What would be your second favorite in the lineup tonight?
Second favorite in the lineup tonight would probably be the 2023 10-year bourbon. I have got to try a few 10-year bourbons over the years, because this is, I think, year 7 of being part of the Michter's adjacent family. And the 2023, I think, is outstanding. So that would be my second.
Awesome. Raven, I know you didn't get to sample anything tonight unless you had a to-go cup in your car. But if you had to pick two, knowing the lineup as well as you do, what would have been your two favorites tonight?
So we talked about how experience is such a big part of tasting whiskey, and like nostalgia plays into that, right? You think back of the time and the place you were. And when the 20-year came out, I was ending a really, really long road trip. And I had just gotten to the point, at the time I lived in Seattle, and I had just gotten to the point where I could see the skyscrapers in the distance, and I lived right downtown. So I knew I was almost home. I was like excited to get there and just kind of unwind. And then one of my top accounts and closest friends in Seattle texted me and he goes, "Hey, I need to talk to you." And of course, I'm thinking like, oh no, what's going on? What's wrong? What fire do I have to put out? So I gave him a call and he said that the 20-year had just gotten delivered and that he was going to crack the bottle if I wanted to stop by for a sip. So of course, I turned the car around to go back over. So it was really just a lovely moment amongst friends. But I will say it's the first pour where I've totally fangirled. I called Andrea the next day. I was like, I don't know what you did to this, but kudos. Like it's just phenomenal. It's like nothing I've ever tried before. So the 20-year bourbon, shocker, is my favorite out of the group. And then if I have to choose a second favorite, I am a rye fan. That's usually my go-to. So my daily drinker or my weekly drinker, if my doctor is listening, is going to be the single barrel rye.
Probably the insurance company more than the doctor. Right? But
Yeah, exactly.
just joking. Andrea, how about yourself? If you had to pick two favorites tonight from the lineup.
I would probably go a different route. I would exclude 10 and 20 just because I think they're in a special kind of category all them to themselves. I love our bourbon. If you check my home purchasing record, it probably has the mostly bourbon on it. I adore our bourbon. I drink it all the time. It is my go-to. I think my second tonight, I was really just, sometimes maybe it's just the evening, but the toasted sour mash tonight just was like, I don't know. I could have had quite a bit more of that, but I have to drive home, so I can't partake. But it just, I don't know, just the whole experience for me, it just tasted so good and just reminded me of, like I think I said earlier, just a beautiful charcuterie board with nice whiskey and smoked honey and some nice meats and cheese and nuts. I just could see it pairing so well, and it was like, wow, this is really beautiful tonight. So yeah.
Awesome. All right, Kurt, I'm putting you on the spot.
Runaway for me, the 10, just an absolute rock star. Like, I don't know, I'm in love with that. I wish that bottle was mine. I had a buddy, I had a lot of messages, DMs here on the chat and texts coming through as this tasting was going on, and that's always a cool thing. It's like people are buzzing and messaging private stuff about it. That 10, we had some chat back and forth. It just pips that 20 by a wee bit, but it's, I don't know, next level, absolute next level whiskey. I think the 20 would follow that, but I'm not going to go so simplistic on this one, just because it is a huge special drink to have. So I'm just going to go back to the sour mash. It's probably the one I want to hit the most. And when the heartstrings tug, then I'm going to the American that I talked about earlier. Andrew, I don't know who else you're throwing this to. If anybody, before you declare yours, I know this has probably been beaten like an absolute dead horse, but I'm just saying it out loud one more time. Kensington Wine Market unequivocally wants a cask of Michter.
Yeah, it's been asked many times. In fact, Joe used to get sick of me asking, or sorry, Matt used to get sick of me asking him every time I bumped into him in a whiskey festival in London or Paris or whatever, could I have a cask of And I even got to the point where I said, look, you're already doing single barrels of rye. Just let me have one full single barrel of rye. And yeah, it's not happened yet. And it's not for lack of asking. And you know what? Again, I respect the way they do things. I mean, you know, they're at a point where, like, if you make exceptions like that for one, you got to do them for others. It's a Pandora's box. So
Wait, so they're doing it for others, so I could buy one for myself in the
but
club?
the next time I bump into Matt, I will totally say the exact same thing just to give him a hard time, because it'll be funny. All right, Harmony, I need to unmute you. Sorry. Go ahead if you want to share your two favorites tonight too.
Well, as I said in the chat previously, like my everyday Michter's favorite, just for like something exciting and not the everyday, would be the unblended American whiskey. I love the fruity profile and just like how round and approachable it is. Andrea, that would be my book whiskey. And then, as I said before, if this 20-year was my book whiskey, I would lose track of my book. Same with the 10-year bourbon. They're both great. You're absolutely right that the 10-year is special. And I do remember my first time drinking it. I was actually with Dan at a barbecue about 6 or 8 years ago. And there was like not even a drink left in the bottom of the bottles, but he signed them both, the 10-year rye and the 10-year bourbon, and gave them to me and said, take them home and finish them. And I've never touched them. I just have them on my bar. But I was introduced to Michter's from a friend after telling him that I was a big American whiskey fan and I liked all things bourbon. He's like, have you had Michter's? And I was like, no. And it changed everything. Everything has now been compared to the Michter's profile, which is unfair, but it is what it is. So American, for me, the American whiskey is awesome. I love the 10-year. I wish I had a 2023 bottle at home, but I'm lucky I have some previous releases squirreled away. And the sour mash really surprised me. I love when the hype or the naysayers are wrong. And I had some people say, oh, you know, the sour mash toasted is fine, but the previous sour toasted barrels were better. I mean, it's hard to compare, but it's fantastic. And I'm glad I had a chance to try it.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Harmony. I'm going to be kind of boring here. I liked the 10 and the 20, but the sour mash and the toasted barrel sour mash are my favorites in that order. I still just really like the sour mash. I don't know. It's still my favorite quote unquote bourbon that's out there. So I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to share the results here quickly, and then we're going to wrap. If there are any other quick questions that you want to ask, please do ask them. But there are the results. Round one, the 20-year-old by a mile, followed by the toasted barrel sour mash and the 10-year. And then round two, second favorite, it's the 10-year, followed by the 20 and the toasted barrel in second. And then Evan, being cheeky as he is, asked a third question. The bottle I'm most likely to add to my stock at home is the toasted barrel finish in the 10-year. Well, Evan's being a little bit cheeky and mischievous there, because those two bottles are only available in limited quantities. And as I mentioned at the start of the tasting, we'll send out an email tomorrow. You'll have an opportunity to enter a ballot to buy the 10 and or, well, no, I should say, or the sour mash toasted barrel. You won't get both. If everyone in this tasting enters, everyone won't get one, but you'll have an opportunity at it. So thank you for that, everyone. I want to say thank you to Raven, to Karina, and especially to Andrea for tonight's tasting tonight. I always love the opportunity to talk to people, not just in sales, but who actually have a hands-on approach to making the whiskey, because there's a different perspective to be had and to learn from there. And we certainly really appreciate having you on tonight, Andrea.
Thank you. It was an honor. Like I say, I really this is what I do, and I love sharing it. And I'm sorry if I got a little super passionate there for a minute, but that's just me. I mean, I really do enjoy this. We have a whole team of people here. I welcome all of you. If you come to Kentucky for any reason, please, please, please reach out to us, because we would love to host you in some way at our Fort Nelson distillery, or we have a beautiful bar at Fort Nelson there. We serve world-class cocktails. We're really honored to be able to share our whiskeys, and thank you all for being here tonight.
Well, thank you, Andrea. And I do want to say, like, if you haven't been to Louisville or Kentucky as a whole, it's changed a lot in the last decade, and largely for the better. Whiskey Row, as they call it, is a pretty fun and exciting place to go and visit now. So there's lots of good reasons to go there. Andrea, Raven, Karina, thank you for being here tonight, for taking your time. Once more, one final time, thank you to James and everyone at Authentic Wine and Spirits. And I hope everyone, you had a great time tonight. I hope you enjoyed the tasting, and look forward to seeing you soon. And next time you're looking for a bottle of American whiskey, make sure you grab a bottle of Michter's. So thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon.
Thank you all so much.
Bye now.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Bye.